Welcome to a fresh installment of Pastor Scott Attempts and Answer. These are questions that you have sent into me that come from your daily Bible reading. I know lots of you are going through binge reading the Bible, our 90-day Bible challenge. Remember, it's never too late to start. And if you have started, keep on going. And if you've missed a few days, just go back to your last day of reading and keep reading. The idea is that we keep reading the Bible together. So thanks so much for the questions you've sent in. I've responded again personally to some of you, but I decided to take this one question that came up a few times. And the question comes from Genesis chapter 22, and it's an important one. The question is, why did God command Abraham to offer Isaac as a sacrifice? And the text kind of gives us a simple answer. It was a test. That's the why. But I think actually the question is asking, how could God ask this of Abraham? Like, what does that say about God, that he would ask Abraham to offer his son as a sacrifice? Is God endorsing or looking for child sacrifice? Does this implicate God in some kind of evil? I mean, later on in the Old Testament, God specifically says that he abhors child sacrifice. So has God changed his mind? What's going on here? The late atheist Christopher Hitchens, he said this: I find a father holding a knife to his son's throat to show his love to a totalitarian dictator wicked. He just thought it showed God was awful and not to be worshipped. In fact, some people would say this shows that God is not real. So what do we do with this? How do we answer this question? Why did God and how could God ask Abraham to offer his son Isaac? Well, here's a few things that will point us in the direction of an answer, or at least keep the conversation going, and that's my hope in approaching these questions. The first thing to consider is the surrounding culture of the time. And this isn't an excuse just to say, well, everybody else was doing it, so why not Abraham? That's not the idea here. But there was a prevalent idea in the surrounding culture that child sacrifice was one way to show your devotion to your God. And so maybe in Abraham's mind, this wasn't so unreasonable, perhaps. But I think this actually shows how different this passage is, how different the God of the Bible is compared to the gods of the surrounding culture, because I don't think it was ever in God's intent or mind to actually offer Isaac as a sacrifice. He was actually going to show a different way, a substitutionary way, a way that was different from all the surrounding cultures. God wanted to reveal that to Abraham. So this story actually shows how God is very different to the gods of the surrounding cultures. Second thing to keep in mind is that Abraham had a deep relationship of trust at this point with Yahweh, with the God of Israel. And he had this relationship because of what he's experienced in the past. And so back in Genesis chapter 18, Abraham actually said these words: will not the judge of all the earth do what is right? That's foundational to this whole thing. Abraham had this understanding that whatever God would ask of him, God would do what is right, what is morally right, what is right in the future and the planning and the promise that he's given to Abraham. Remember, God has promised that out of Abraham would come blessing for many nations. He would have many sons. And so Abraham had this deep trust that God would do what is right. Another thing to keep in mind is the age of Isaac. And this came out in our conversation, thanks to the Ab Days, when we had our virtual coffee on Sunday. Just a reminder that Isaac wasn't this little kid, wasn't this little baby. And we know that because there's a few clues in the passage going through. First of all, Isaac seems to be very aware of what's going on. He asks very legitimate questions that are not the questions that a 5-year-old would ask. He's also able to carry a big bundle of wood up the mountain, and so he's got some strength to him. In fact, in the Jewish rabbinic tradition, they say that Isaac was probably 37 years old. In fact, some of them say that the announcement that Abraham was taking Isaac to offer was the cause of Sarah's death. We don't have any real proof of that, but the idea is this: Isaac was old enough that he went willingly. even when he was being secured to the altar, he could easily have overpowered Abraham. So there's much more to the story than just some weird request for a child sacrifice. There's a willingness being shown on Isaac's part as he goes up the mountain in faith. Well, speaking of faith, that's really the point of the story. And that's our last kind of big clue, or second last clue, actually. I've got one more to come. Second last big clue of what's happening in this story. And that is faith. As Abraham is about to go up the mountain with Isaac, he says to his servant, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship, and we will come again to you." There's this understanding that as Abraham went up, he fully expected to return with Isaac. There was that kind of faith at play. In fact, as they go up to the mountain and Isaac says, "I see the wood, I see the knife, I see everything that's happening. Where's the lamb?" This is what Abraham says. God himself will provide a lamb. So there's a faith component. Well, fast forward to Hebrews. Hebrews gives us kind of the backstory insight. And the author to the Hebrews says this about Abraham, that he considered that God was able even to raise Isaac from the dead. That's the kind of faith. And that's really the test that's at play. The test isn't, will you sacrifice your son to show your loyalty to me? The test is, do you trust me? Do you trust me to do what is right? Do you trust me to do what is good, what is beautiful, what is true? Do you have that kind of faith in me? That's the test. Well, ultimately, this whole story is a foreshadowing of the promise of the Messiah that is to come. Even way back in Abraham, we see hints of the kind of Messiah that would come to save the world. And we see that in a number of different ways. In fact, throughout the Bible, God asks his prophets, and Abraham in this sense is a prophet, to reenact in the miniature things that he would do on a larger scale. So the prophets are often asked to do very small, simple, weird things in order to show something that's part of the bigger picture plan of what God is about to do. And that's what's happening here. We're catching a glimpse in Abraham and Isaac of God's ultimate purpose for bringing redemption to the world. The Bible Project, which is a great group of people, great site to check out for all kinds of things, they've got a great comparison between Isaac and Jesus. And I'm just going to read some of those comparisons to you to kind of catch a glimpse of this. Both Isaac and Jesus are beloved sons who have been long awaited and are born in miraculous circumstances. Both sons carry the wood that is to be the instrument of their deaths on their backs. In both cases, the father leads the son, and the son follows obediently toward his own death. God provides the sacrifice, which Abraham says will be a lamb. And Jesus was also an innocent son who went willingly up the mountain to be crucified. So you see the parallel that develops between Isaac and between the ultimate sacrifice. And this is what we find in Romans chapter 8. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, will he not also with him graciously give us all things? That's really the lesson. That's what the story is about. And so God, in asking Isaac to do this, is also asking Abraham to do this, is also sending a message of what's to come and what he will do in sending his own son for the salvation of the world. Well, hopefully this gives us a bit of a direction in answering and responding to this question. If you have further comments, please send them my way. We'll keep the conversation going. Send in some more questions and we'll tackle them on the next episode of Pastor Scott Attempts and Answer. Thanks for checking in today.